A red-haired woman knocked on the door of a dusty frontier ranch, seeking work, and the rancher, voice low and steady, answered, "Only one spot left, and it's wife." The dust clung to her legs like regret, hot red, and impossible to shake off. Clara Redstone walked alone up the slope that led to the last house on the ridge. The soles of her boots near split her cotton dress, pasted to her back with sweat. Summer in Bitter Ridge wasn't the kind of heat you could outrun. It sank into bone and memory, humming with crickets and secrets. A warped wagon wheel lay half buried along the path, bleached gray by sun and time. Beside it, grasshoppers leapt in erratic arcs as her feet disturbed their quiet. She pulled the small wooden trunk behind her, its single iron handle wrapped in a strip of old leather to keep from splintering her fingers. Inside was all she owned: 3 changes of clothes, a stitched-up Bible with half its pages missing, a revolver she hadn't used in 2 years, and a folded letter she couldn't bring herself to burn. The house came into view just past a stand of cottonwoods, its porch bagging its chimney cold, the fields beyond scorched under an amber skyway. A rooster crowed once, confused by the dying light. No sign of dogs, no sign of life. Just that one lantern flickering weakly in the front window, like a dare. She paused at the steps. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached to wipe dust from her face, smearing it instead. Her red hair was tucked under a faded bonnet, though a few damp strands had slipped free, curling at her temple. Clara didn't pray before knocking. She hadn't done that in a long time. The door opened with a creak before her knuckles met wood a second time. A man filled the frame. Broad shoulders, sun-dark skin sleeves rolled high on his arms. He held a shotgun loosely at his side, not raised, not lowered. Just there, like it always was. His voice was dry as the land. "You lost?" "No," she said, then coughed, voice raw from dust. "I'm looking for work. Any kind. I don't ask much. I can cook, mend, clean." She swallowed. "I'm decent with animals." He studied her, not with cruelty, but like a man trying to decide if the wind was changing. His eyes were pale gray, too still for comfort. "There's no job here," he said. "Only position open is Leroy." The words hit her like a slap she didn't see coming. Clara blinked. "Beg pardon." He shifted, resting a hand on the doorframe. "You heard me." Her throat tightened, but her jaw didn't give. "That's not what I came for." "I reckon not." His voice stayed steady. "But it's what's on offer." Behind him, she saw a girl's silhouette at the end of the hallway, small, unmoving notebook clutched to her chest. Clara gripped the trunk handle harder. The sun behind her was almost gone now, and with it, the safety of the road. She had no name to give, no man to vouch for her, and nowhere left to run that didn't end in someone recognizing her father's eyes in her face. She could walk away. But the silence behind this door felt safer than the silence outside it. "I'm not looking for a handout," she said at last. "I'm not offering one." His gaze didn't soften. "I've got a daughter, land to run, and a preacher who won't stop sniffing around. You stay here. It's as my wife. In name. I don't expect more." She didn't answer right away, just stared at him, sweat drying in streaks on her cheeks. Then she nodded once. The door swung wider and she stepped inside. "I said yes," Clara thought, as the door closed behind her. "But I didn't come to be someone's wife. I came to disappear." The morning found Clara lying stiff on a narrow cot, in a room that smelled of cedar, old wool, and silence. Thin light slanted through the warped shutters, painting the floor in angled gold. Her dress was folded over the chair. Her trunk, locked, sat at the foot of the bed, like a loyal dog scarred from years of being dragged across dust and regret. She sat up slowly, stomach churning from something deeper than nerves. A copper taste lingered in her mouth. The nausea had come and gone for weeks now, though she'd never named it, never dared. She pressed a hand to her belly, then pulled it away, like it burned. From the hall came soft footsteps too light to be a man's. Clara turned her head just as a small figure passed the open door, notebook clutched tight to her chest. The girl didn't speak, didn't pause, just moved like a shadow with eyes. Clara dressed quick, her fingers fumbling the buttons. Before opening the trunk, she checked the latch on the door. Locked. She knelt, reached under the folded shirts, and felt the cool weight of the revolver beneath her palm. Still there. Safe. She didn't pull it out, just touched it long enough to feel something familiar. Then she locked the trunk again. By the time she stepped into the kitchen, the man Silas she'd overheard the girl call him was already seated at the table. He looked like he belonged there, one hand cradling a tin mug of coffee, the other resting on the edge of a newspaper that hadn't been turned in days. The stove clattered with a low fire. Biscuits sat, cooling on a tin tray. Eleanor was perched on a stool in the corner, legs swinging, eyes too large and too still. Clara nodded to her, but the girl didn't nod back. Silas motioned toward the empty chair across from him. Clara took its spine straight, hands folded in her lap. "You always offer marriage to strangers who knock on your door?" she asked, trying to keep her tone level. The bitterness slipped in anyway. He sipped his coffee before answering. "Only the ones who look like they've run out of road. That's a poor way to start anything." "I'm not starting anything." His eyes flicked to the girl. "I'm maintaining." Clara glanced at Eleanor, who was now pretending to draw in the margins of her notebook. "Why wife?" Clara asked, quieter. "Why not cook, clean, or boarder?" Even Silas didn't blink. "Because the preacher's been nosing around. Says a man raising a girl alone is no fit arrangement. Says I need a woman under my roof proper like. And the law's not far behind that opinion. And you think a paper marriage makes it proper? I think it makes it keep it." Clara let the silence sit. She broke it by reaching for a biscuit, even though her stomach rolled again, as soon as she took a bite. Later that night, after the house had scuttled into its creaks and groans, Clara sat cross-legged on the cot, trunk open. The revolver was back beneath the clothes. In her hands she held the letter. The paper was brittle now, stained with rust-colored spots where blood had dried long ago. The handwriting was shifty but clear. Her father never said much in life, and the letter didn't say much in death. "Clara, if they find you, they'll make you suffer for what I did. You don't deserve that. Burn this. Forget me." She hadn't forgotten. And she didn't burn the letter. She folded it slow, deliberate, and slid it back beneath the false bottom of the trunk. Some ghosts were better left where they could still be found. If this story's got you saddled up for more, hit that subscribe button and ride along. We're just getting started out here in Bitter Ridge. The heat hadn't lifted by morning, just settled deeper into the wood and stone, like it meant to stay a while. Clara stood at the porch railing, squinting into the haze. The valley below shimmered as if it might catch fire, and the sky hung low with dust and the distant hum of flies. The house behind her creaked in the heat, its nails loosening, boards expanding with every dry gust. Her palms were raw from scrubbing a tear in her right boot, let in dirt, and she'd reopened a blister on her heel from hauling buckets to the trough. But she didn't complain. Work was a kind of silence, she understood. Inside, she'd spent the better part of the morning fixing the frayed edge of a checked tablecloth, her fingers moving steady through the fabric, while Eleanor sat across from her scribbling into that little black notebook. The girl hadn't spoken a word, but her eyes moved often, watching Clara's hands, watching the thread disappear into seams. When Clara finished, she folded the cloth neatly and slid it across the table without a word. Eleanor picked it up, studied the stitch, and gave the smallest of nods. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was always something. Out near the corral, Silas was mending the eastern fence. Clara could see his shirt hanging off one shoulder, sweat darkening the collar. He worked without looking up, swinging the hammer in rhythmic, unhurried arcs. He hadn't spoken much that morning, not after she'd burned the bacon, not after Eleanor knocked over a water bucket. He just moved like a man who'd grown used to quiet, maybe even depended on it. That evening, as the sun painted the hills in bronze and Smoke a Horse approached from the south trail, Clara heard at first the dull thud of hooves against dry earth. She stepped off the porch as the rider came into view. A man in a deputy's badge brown hat, tipped forward grin that looked easy but didn't sit right. "Evening, miss," he said, dismounting like he owned the dirt beneath him. "I'm looking for Silas Boone." Silas stepped around the corner from the barn, wiping his hands with a rag. His eyes narrowed not at the badge, but at the man wearing it. "Deputy Lynch," he said flatly. Silas, the man, tipped his hat, then glanced at Clara. "Didn't know you had company. New help?" Silas didn't answer. Clara stepped forward before the silence grew too thick. "I'm just staying for a while," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Passing through." "Is that so?" Lynch studied her. "Got a name, Clara? From Missouri?" He smiled, but his eyes didn't. "Funny. You don't sound Missouri." Before she could respond, Eleanor appeared at the doorway, notebook hugged tight against her chest. Lynch's gaze lingered a beat too long on the girl. "Cute kid." Silas took a step forward. "You come for something?" Deputy Lynch chuckled. "Routine. Reverend Hale asked me to check in. Said there's concern in town about arrangements out here." Silas's jaw worked once before he replied. "My house, my concern." "Sure," Lynch said, adjusting his hat. "Still folks talk." When the deputy rode off, Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Later after supper, Silas handed her a bucket to rinse by the pump. He didn't look at her, but his voice was low and careful. "You need to be more careful when folks ask questions." She wiped her hands dry on her skirt. "I know." Behind the window curtain, Eleanor watched them, her pencil moving across the page. She didn't speak, but when Clara passed her room later, she saw what had been written, red score. The pine cone was rough, still clinging to traces of sap, and warm from being in a child's hand too long. Eleanor offered it without a word, just held it out, as Clara scrubbed dust from the porch step. For a moment, Clara didn't move. Then she took it. "Thank you," she said softly. Eleanor didn't reply, just sat beside her and opened the frayed notebook again. The pencil moved across the page in slow, deliberate lines. Clara didn't ask what she was writing. She just held the pine cone in both hands and stared at it, like it might fall apart if she looked away. That night, after supper and chores, Clara slipped into the barn alone. The air inside was heavy with heat and hay swarming with moths that danced around the lantern light. She sat down on an overturned bucket and held the pine cone against her chest. No one had given her anything without asking for something in return in years. The tears came before she could stop them, silent, stubborn, and hot. She pressed her face to her hand, shoulders shaking in the dark, and let the grief move through her like a fever breaking. The next morning brought no softness. Clara heard the lowing before she stepped off the porch. One of the heifers lay crumpled near the trough flies, already thick around its eyes. Its neck was bloated and blue. "Snakebite," Silas muttered, crouching beside it. "Damn diamondback. Third one this season." "I'll help," Clara said. He looked at her, measuring something, then handed her the knife without a word. She didn't hesitate. Her movements were precise, too precise. She slit the belly, removed the organs that could be salvaged, bled the carcass without flinching. Her hands moved like someone who'd done this before many times, in less forgiving circumstances. When she was done, Silas stood watching her. "You've worked cattle?" he asked, quiet. Clara wiped the blade clean. "Something like that." He nodded once, but his eyes stayed on her longer than they should have. Later that evening, when Clara left to fetch water from the creek, Silas walked into the house. Eleanor was reading near the fire. Her notebook was closed. Silas moved past her boots heavy against the floorboards. He stood at the door to Clara's room for a long time before opening it. The trunk sat under the window, latched but not locked. He knelt slowly and flipped the clasp. The lid creaked open. Inside, folded neatly, were clothes, a small stack of letters, and beneath them, things that didn't belong to a woman just passing through. A worn revolver, oiled and wrapped in a kerchief. A faded photograph of Cullen Redstone, eyes sharp and cruel even in stillness. Silas recognized the face from wanted posters years back. And a strip of fabric, the corner of a baby's blanket, soft blue, with a stitched white star, stained at the edge with something brown. Silas closed the trunk, slow and careful, like the things inside might bite. When Clara returned, sweat darkening her collar, he didn't speak, just nodded once and walked out to the porch. He needed air and distance and the time to decide what kind of danger he'd let inside his home. But behind him, Eleanor watched again from the shadows, pencil in hand, and on the top corner of her page in careful block letters, she wrote, "Widowmaker's daughter." The cicadas screamed louder that week. Mornings came dry and yellow, the heat laying thick over Bitter Ridge, like a wool blanket someone forgot to pull back. Dust coated everything, window panes, saddle leather, lungs. It made Clara's teeth ache. Deputy Asa Lynch rode up just past noon, a slow clatter of hooves down the dry trail. His horse kicked up red grit as he dismounted, a lopsided grin already painted on his face. "Hot day for visitors," Silas said, stepping off the porch, hands tucked into his belt. Asa tipped his hat. "Heard you had company out here. Thought I'd see if y'all needed anything from town." Clara stood at the far end of the garden, straw hat, pulled low, arms deep in a tomato vine. But Asa's eyes were already on her. "She yours?" he asked, too casual. Silas didn't blink. "She stays here." "Huh." Asa rubbed his jaw, eyes lingering too long. "She looks familiar. Don't suppose she's from around Helena?" Silas didn't answer. Asa leaned on the porch rail like it was his own. "Heard a name the other day. Redstone. Mean anything to you?" Clara paused. A vine snapped in her hands. She stood slowly, brushing her palms on her apron, and walked toward the porch with even steps. "I'm Clara," she said. "From Missouri." Asa tilted his head. "Funny thing, Cullen Redstone's wanted posters went all the way through Missouri last year. Some say he had a daughter. Red hair, sharp eyes, smart as a fox." Clara met his gaze. "I'm not him." Asa's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Didn't say you were." Silas stepped between them, voice like a low drum. "You done here?" Deputy Asa raised his hands, mock innocent. "Just checking in. Folks talk, you know. Say it's good to know who lives in your valley." He left with a cloud of dust behind him. Clara stood still, fists clenched. Silas didn't say a word, just stared at the spot where Asa had been, like memorizing it in case he needed to shoot at it later. That night, Clara found Eleanor in the loft, surrounded by a nest of dried grass and paper scraps. The girl had a habit of drawing when she didn't understand things. She held up a sketch, now shaky but clear. Clara bent over, vomiting into a basin. A second sketch beneath it, Clara with a baby in her arms, its head round and unwarmed like a dream not yet finished. Clara crouched slowly. Her voice was barely more than a breath. "You saw?" Eleanor nodded once. "Don't tell your father," Clara whispered. The girl didn't ask why. She just looked at Clara with eyes that had learned too early how to carry someone else's secrets. "Promise me." Another small nod. Clara reached out and smoothed the girl's hair, gentle. "You're a smart girl." "I write things down," Eleanor said, finally speaking. "I know." The girl turned back to her notebook, and Clara stepped away. heart hammering like a fist on a locked door. Outside, the wind had dropped. The cicadas stopped their screaming, but Clara didn't feel relief. Only the sound of silence closing in, like a trap. Jeb Mallory rode into Bitter Ridge like a buzzard sniffing a carcass, slow, greasy, and too sure of himself. He spat near the post office and tipped his hat to no one. Asa Lynch met him outside the saloon. They talked by the horse trough, voices low, eyes sharp. "I seen her," Jeb said, drawing the brim of his hat lower. "She's Cullen's girl, sure as sunrise. That red hair runs in the blood. But she ain't alone." Asa squinted, chewing a splinter of grass. "She's working Boone's place. She's more than working." Jeb smirked. "That belly's starting to show. Carrying Cullen's blood. That makes it bounty times two, don't it?" Asa didn't answer right away. He looked south toward the dust trail that led to Silas Boone's ranch. "You sure? Sure as the day I killed her bastard father," Jeb said. Clara packed in silence. The baby clothes she had stitched late at night, when the house slept, were tucked between folded linens. The pine cone from Eleanor's hand, now dried and fragile, sat on the top of the bundle. It was just before midnight. The heat still clung to the earth, heavy as shame. She didn't want to wake Eleanor, but the girl had already slipped into her boots, holding her notebook, like it was armor. "We have to go," Clara whispered. "I know," Eleanor said. They stepped out onto the porch, the stars sharp overhead. Clara reached for the reins of the mare tied near the fence. "You running from me?" Silas's voice stopped her cold. He stood in the doorway, backlit by the glow of the oil lamp behind him. His rifle wasn't in hand, but it didn't need to be. The weight of his presence was enough. Clara turned slowly. "You shouldn't be up." "I ain't slept," he said. "Too many questions hanging in the dark." She swallowed hard. "You don't understand." "No." He stepped down barefoot in the dirt. "I don't. Because instead of trusting me with the truth, you packed up my daughter, like she was yours to take." Clara held Eleanor close. "They're coming. Men worse than you've ever known. One of them killed my father, and now he wants my baby. I wasn't going to let her see that." "You should have told me," Silas growled. "I would have built you a wall, Clara, not a fence, a damn fortress." Clara's voice cracked. "I wasn't trying to stay. I just needed to disappear." "You didn't disappear," he said softer now. "You put down roots. You fixed my fence. You mended my girl's book. You stirred the morning coffee before I even lit the fire. You don't run from that. You grow it." Clara's eyes brimmed, but she blinked them dry. "I thought I had to carry it all alone." "You don't," he said, stepping closer. "Not anymore." They stood still in the moonlight, the mare pawing at the dust behind them. The wind stirred the grass. Something shifted, quiet but certain. Silas looked at Eleanor. "You okay, Bug?" She nodded. He looked back at Clara. "Then let's go inside. They'll come, and we'll be ready." The night had fallen silent before it broke. Clara had already closed her eyes when far-off hoofbeats rattled her senses. She opened them, not ready, but alive. Above the sky was ink-black stars, blinking like unseen witnesses pressed against the dark. On the porch, a lantern burned faintly, casting shadows that trembled against the wood. She slipped from the cot, wrapped her slippers, and crept to the door. In the glow, she saw Silas place a small rifle by the wall, voice low. "Time," he said. Clara nodded once, then turned east to where Eleanor's door stood slightly ajar. The girl propped on a pillow, eyes wide in the darkness, clutching her notebook. "We have to go," Clara whispered. Eleanor didn't stir. Instead, she pressed a page toward her. A quick drawing of the three of them. Clara, Eleanor, Silas, hands joined. Clara blinked back tears. She lifted the bound journal and tucked it under her arm. Outside, the July breeze was thick with dust, and the scent of dried grass. Fireflies drifted near the barn door, like puddled sparks. Clara walked between long shadows, the pine cones crunching beneath her feet. She led Eleanor to the horse lowing quietly at the edge of its stall. Peelings filled their space, even before they saddled the mare. But before they could step off the porch, a shot rang out, sharp and ruthless in the quiet night. Clara grabbed Eleanor's hand. They dove for the barn wall, just as a volley of voices and boots thundered through the dust. Deputy Lynch and 3 men charged up the steps, lantern-raised, rifles trained. "Don't move, girl," Lynch barked at Eleanor, who cried out, clutching Clara's skirt. Silas stepped between them, rifle raised. "This ends now." One gunshot echoed. Clara felt the impact in her gut and smelled metal. Silas staggered, clutching his shoulder as blood darkened his shirt. Clara's heart hammered. She drew her revolver from the pocket she'd sewn inside her dress. Her hand didn't shake. She stepped forward toward Lynch. "Let her go," she said, voice steady as stone. Lynch laughed. "You don't decide here, Widowmaker's spawn." Clara's finger burned on the trigger. She fired the bullet, ripping through Jeb's chest. He dropped ragdoll limp against the dust. Silas moaned and sank to his knees, leaning against the barn's edge. Clara looked down at him, then toward Eleanor, cowering behind a bale of hay. She ran to Silas and pulled him inside the barn. The wooden door struggled under Lynch's boots, splintering. Clara grabbed pitchfork tines and propped them across the entrance. Eleanor lifted a bucket of warm water from nearby, a relic of their hurried flight, and dashed it toward Lynch as he forced his way inside. The scalding water sizzled over his hands, drawing a howl of rage. He recoiled, fumbling for his revolver. But Clara was already there. "Stay back," she snapped. Lynch, burning and disoriented, took a step too close. Clara lifted her gun, and it felt like all the gravel in her chest settled behind the hammer. She aimed for his center mass. Not mercy, just the end. Before he could raise his weapon, she fired. Lynch slumped in the dust outside hatch, clutching his shattered wrist. As she approached, he coughed, blood eyes wide. "Your father didn't die," he rasped. "He made a deal with us. You're bait." Clara knelt next to him. In the lantern glow, she saw the wrongness in his gaze, surprise mixed with fear. "I'd rather him be dead to me than what you made of him," she said. She cocked her head back. "He is dead to me." She fired again, cut short the lie. She stood in the haze of red dust and fading fireflies. Eleanor pressed against Silas's side, small sobs catching in her throat. Silas's breath came, ragged body, trembling, but alive. Clara knelt again and pressed a hand to his wound. It was a breath draw away from what she once was, a killer's daughter. Now she was a savior. When dawn's pale light seeped between barn slats, Clara had patched Silas's shoulder as best she could, using torn cloth from her dress and water warmed by fire. Eleanor held her notebook, the page that once asked questions now blank. Silas looked up at her. Voices of townfolk drifted through the broken door. You saved us," he said. Clara stood, dusty, bright red hair loose around her shoulders. The revolver felt heavy in her hand, like truth itself. Silas's voice broke the air between them. "I reckon walls are better with doors. I don't need a wife to protect me. I need someone who fights beside me." Clara met his pale eyes. Her face held a single quiet truth. She nodded. The attack had scorched them all. Though gunsmoke drifted out of the barn into the dawn, and the air still held grit and regret, something had shifted. Clara realized that disappearing had never been the goal. It was building connection. That night had not broken them. It shaped them. As she mounted the mare, Eleanor climbed behind her notebook, tucked under one arm. Silas leaned on the porch, rifle in hand, guarding what mattered most. In that red light morning, 3 silhouettes stood together on the ridge, rough and unplished, but unbroken. And Clara didn't look back to the road she'd come. She stared only ahead where home had finally begun. The valley held its breath after the fire. Smoke no longer hung in the rafters, but the scent of it clung to everything wood-clothes memory. The barn was patched, the porch swept clean of blood and boot prints. But silence remained. The kind that only comes after you've survived something big, something that doesn't leave you the same. Silas lived. The bullet had missed anything fatal, though it had come close enough to brush bone. Clara nursed him through the fever, cleaned his wound twice daily, with water that Eleanor warmed on the stove. The man barely spoke, but his silence was no longer a wall, it was a thread, tied between them, taut and honest. The sun rose dry and relentless, over Bitter Ridge. A week passed. Then one morning Clara rose early and took the photograph, the old wanted poster of her father, and carried it into the field. In one hand she held a shovel. In the other, the last of the poisoned heifer's bones bundled in canvas. She walked out to the edge of the pasture, where the earth was baked hard from years of hoofbeats and drought. She dug until her hands blistered. Then she laid the bones in the ground, folded the photo once, and pressed it down into the hole. "Whatever deal you made," she whispered to the wind, "I'm not carrying it anymore." She filled the hole, tamped the earth flat with the back of the shovel, and didn't look back as she walked away. Eleanor sat at the table, her legs swinging beneath the bench, notebook open. Her latest drawing was simple 3 figures, hand in hand. No shadows this time, no weapons, just Clara, Silas, and herself. Under a crooked sun. Behind them, the house stood sturdy and square. Clara studied it from over the girl's shoulder. Her breath caught. "You gave me a new face," she said softly. "Not angry, not scared?" Eleanor nodded. "That's what you look like now." That evening after supper, Clara took the last letter from her father, the one with blood dried in the crease, and stepped outside. The breeze had shifted slightly cooler now. Hints of coming autumn stirred in the leaves, though the heat still pulsed from the earth. She lit the letter with a kitchen match and held it until flame curled the paper like brittle fingers. Words turned to ash, names burned away. When it dropped to the dirt, there was nothing left but orange glow and smoke. Behind her, Silas stood watching. "You didn't have to," he said. "I did," Clara replied. He walked closer. His shoulder was still stiff, wrapped in a fresh strip of linen Clara had boiled that morning. The pain was less now, the scar would stay, but the man beneath had steadied. Silas looked out toward the pasture, toward where she had buried the past. "You staying?" he asked finally. Clara turned to him, brushing ash from her hands. "There's no open positions left," she said. "Not cook, not ranch hand, not even wife." He raised a brow. She smiled soft and steady. "I belong here. That's different." They stood under the open sky. 2 people who had nothing left to hide. Behind them inside the house, Eleanor turned a page in her notebook and began to draw again. Not to record, to remember. The summer heat hadn't let up. Cicadas shrilled from the tall grass. The sun burned high, casting everything in sharp relief, barn fence posts, and the 3 figures standing together on the front porch. Behind them, the house stood slate and square. Before them, the shadow of the great oak stretched long across the dust, offering a patch of peace in the dry world. Clara stood in the center, arms loose at her sides, her red hair catching the light. Not wild now, not a warning, just glowing like flame at dusk. Eleanor sat on the porch rail, her legs swinging, notebook open across her lap. She cleared her throat. "I wrote something," she said. Silas gave her a small nod. Clara turned, a smile curving slow and quiet. Eleanor read aloud. "Her hair is still red, but now it looks like sunset fire. Not danger anymore, just the last light before the stars." Silence followed. Even the cicadas paused like listening. Clara blinked and turned her face toward the horizon, where the sky blazed orange. Her hand found Eleanor's. Silas rested his good arm across Clara's back. They stood like that for a long while, the three of them framed by heat and memory. Not running, not hiding, just home. There is something about the quiet strength of a woman like Clara Redstone that stays with you long after the dust settles. I wrote this story not just to echo the grit and isolation of the Old West, but to honor the silent battles so many women fought and still fight to claim space in a world built to forget them. Clara isn't a hero in the traditional sense. She's flawed, guarded, scarred. But she shows us that sometimes choosing to stay, choosing to care, is the bravest act of all.